Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Recently on this channel we have been looking at the history of the Double Dragon franchise and thus far have already taken in-depth looks at the first two parts of the series. Both of these games, along with their home console ports, were massive success stories and both highly influential within the beat 'em up genre. But what about the third part of the series, Double Dragon 3? Or I guess what I should really be saying, Double Dragon 3s, as there are two separate games that shared the title Double Dragon 3. However, to differentiate these titles they at least had their own subheadings, Double Dragon 3 the Rosetta Stone and Double Dragon 3 the Sacred Stones. In this content we are going to look at the history of both of these games, so we have a lot of ground to cover. Both of these titles are infamous in their own ways for their contributions to the world of gaming, but neither are as celebrated as their predecessors. Keeping this in mind, this means we are going to explore why both of these titles are now controversial. So without further ado, this, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Double Dragon 3, or Double Dragon 3s. Yeah! It is impossible to understate just what a significant role Double Dragon played within the game industry. The first game, developed by Yoshihisa Kishimoto of Technos Japan, brought a lot of new elements to the table in 1987. The game offered fun, the likes of which had never been seen before, by offering people the experience of playing a beat 'em up cooperatively for the first time. This title built on everything that Kishimoto's previous work, Neketsu Koa Kunio-kun, had established, the title that was reworked and known internationally as Renegade. The following year of 1988 would see the release of Double Dragon 2, a sequel to the original that was initially intended to be just an upgrade. However, the game evolved during development to become a standalone title. Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, with its increased memory size, not only offered consumers new levels to experience, but it also fixed many of the flaws the original game had, most notably offering players far less slowdown, making a playthrough far more fluid and even more enjoyable. New moves were added to the game too, giving players more control than ever. The success of Double Dragon 2 sent shockwaves through the industry, leading to other developers wanting to release beat 'em ups of their very own, leading to the likes of Capcom's Final Fight, Sega's Golden Axe and Konami's Crime Fighters, all of which were made directly in response to Double Dragon 2. Like with previous Double Dragon titles, the first version of Double Dragon 3 would see release in the arcade in the year 1990. Development of this title had started in the previous year of 1989. However, rather interestingly, the production of this game was not led by Kishimoto, like with its predecessors, due to the fact that he was busy working on other projects for Technos. These projects included another game we have focused on here before, WWF Superstars, the first great WWF game, and the first developed for the American World Wrestling Federation over in Japan. The game is a true gem, and the Double Dragon influence is easy to see too. That year Kishimoto also worked on a new intellectual property, a game known as the Combo Tribes. The Combo Tribes was a quality 3-player beat 'em up that once again shared a lot of similarities with Kishimoto's previous work. For this reason, many people look at this game as the true Double Dragon 3, which makes a lot of sense considering that this is a game from the same genre, produced by the same development house and led by the same creator. However, as interesting as all of this is not one of the games we are focusing on today, as instead we need to look at the games released under the name of Double Dragon 3. So with Kishimoto busy on these other titles, instead Technos would outsource the production of a third Double Dragon game to a company known as East Technology, a fairly new development house who had created two arcade games previously, known as Destruction and Gigandes. The fact that Double Dragon 3 was made by an entirely different company would result in the creation of a game with drastically different gameplay and graphics to its predecessors. In a step up from the other games in the series though, like Combo Tribes, this game features 3-player cooperative play, meaning players can take control of both Bimmy and Jimmy Lee, as well as new characters such as Sunny. In this game's plot, the brothers return home after a 2-year training mission. They stumble across a fortune teller known as Hiroko, who informs them they need to seek out 3 Rosetta Stones scattered across the planet to allow them to become the world's strongest fighters. The adventure begins in the USA, with the brothers taking on the remnants of the Black Warriors gang, before heading off to China, Japan, Italy and Egypt, fighting round the world. With regards to Sonny and who he actually is, this was left to ambiguity as he was given no official backstory, making it by this point in time unclear if he was a third Lee brother or just a fellow Suisetsu Ken practitioner. It would become clear years later though that he is in fact the third Lee, when he appeared in Double Dragon 4 as Sonny Lee, but that's a whole story for a future episode. Now in regards to this arcade game, combat is taken part in with the use of an 8-way directional joystick accompanied by 3 action buttons, but controls are greatly different from before. Directional attacks using the joystick and button combinations established in the fantastic Double Dragon 2 have been chucked out of the window, and instead returns to a control scheme similar in many ways to the more primitive 1987 original. Despite its faults, players do have some new abilities though, such as being able to run by pushing twice on the joystick, or being able to perform German suplexes, knee drops and running headbutts. Back-to-back hurricane kicks can now also be executed too, when 2 players perform the move standing near each other. The game actually has further playable characters, which we'll show touch more on soon, but first let's discuss the game's stages, level design and graphics in more detail. As mentioned earlier, the game involves fighting around the world. Players start off in the USA, in what appears to be New York City. I would say the backgrounds and foregrounds in this game are more detailed than what we had seen in the series before, but the game's sprite animations in this fairly aesthetically decent looking world look really out of place. The characters' walking animations are dreadful, with so few frames that it looks like much of the action is happening in slow motion, even though the combat itself does not seem to suffer from slowdown. The combat itself seems to be missing a lot of animation too, such as it looks pretty terrible whenever one player vaults over another. It's all very choppy. Instantaneously from this first stage alone, you can see that this game is a lot more flawed than Double Dragon 2 despite the game's more polished backgrounds. The first stage sees players fighting in the New York streets and a warehouse with a boss fight at the end. Very beat 'em up stuff. Players then progress to China, with combat appearing to take place in a forest, featuring very different sprites to illustrate the change of geographical location. The stage ends with a boss battle against a Bruce Lee looking opponent. Stage 3 takes place in Japan. Once again, some very stereotypical action takes place, this time against samurai sword wielding opponents. The artwork, like much of this game, looks pretty good, and the stage wraps up with a battle against a ninja once inside the building. The ninja opponent has the ability to replicate himself though, proving a bit more challenging than previous fights. Action then progresses to Italy, which is a bizarre stage to say the least. Whilst earlier in the game we are fighting in modern day New York City, we are now facing off against sprites that appear to be from ancient Rome rather than modern Italy, which I assume can only be down to the magic of the Rosetta Stones. Enemies here can be more dangerous than those in previous encounters. Some of these even have the power to shoot players using bow and arrows, bringing projectile attacks into play for the first time. All I can say is that this section feels more like Golden Axe than it does Double Dragon. Players soon arrive in Egypt, with action taking place exactly where you would expect, outside a bloody pyramid. Magic brings the players though to some strange underground forest, which makes the game look even more Golden Axe-y than before. Here players take on many headless opponents as trippy music plays in the background. Action then progresses into what appears to be one of the tombs of a pharaoh, with action in the game shifting further and further into the world of supernatural, with all sorts of ghoulies to take on along the way. In fact, parts of this area even have a tad of a Splatterhouse sort of vibe to them. Ghosts. Eventually, the mummified remains of Cleopatra rises from its tomb, who functions as a boss for the players to take out. After defeating this mummy, it regenerates to its original human form of Cleopatra, who, with her magical powers and the ability to fly, makes her the final opponent of the game. Defeating her leads to the brothers finding her treasure, which in the game's closing scenes they promise they will donate to charity. My question with regards to this is, what rights do the Lees have to give the treasure that belongs to the Egyptian government to a charity of their choosing? If this is true, and they did give Cleopatra's treasure to a charity, they need to be extradited by their national authorities back to Egypt to face the full consequences of the law. Terrible conduct in my opinion. So that was much of what Double Dragon 3 in the arcades had to offer. Choppy combat, animations with missing frames, and a nonsensical story. But Double Dragon 3 Arcade is remembered for more than just this. The game's most infamous feature was the inclusion of an item shop, which was accessible at the start of certain stages. In this shop, players could purchase power-ups, allowing players faster attack speeds, new moves, health, weapons, and even additional playable characters. Why was this in-game store controversial, you may ask? Because it required players to use real-world money, which players would need to insert into the cabinet to unlock these extra features. So all in all, Double Dragon 3 in the arcades has a lot to answer for, as it was probably the first game in history to feature microtransactions to unlock additional content. Not only that, but the fact that you could pay more to make your sprites more powerful meant that the game basically was the first to feature a pay-to-win mechanic too. The game was designed to take arcade consumers' money in all new ways. So in its own shameless way, Double Dragon 3 was as pioneering as any other Double Dragon game, if not more so. This controversial feature outraged players, which would result in Double Dragon 3 receiving a lot of backlash in the arcades. So much so that in the Japanese version of this game, which was released after the North American and European versions, the feature would be completely dropped. The concept of a pay-to-win mechanic and microtransactions after you had already paid to play a game was simply preposterous, and it was transparent to gamers throughout the West how greedy these corporate gaming companies were becoming. The game was totally shunned, so Technos and East Technology would try to do better in Japan. All in all, Double Dragon 3 in the arcades has to be seen as one of the most greedy cash grabs in all of gaming's history, and certainly the greediest ever at its time of release. The whole thing is even dodgier when we take into account that the original developers who made the first two games were not tasked to work on this project, as I assume Technos wanted to sell Double Dragon 3 on its established name value alone. Many corners were cut here, and this game did a lot of damage to the Double Dragon brand as a result. Interestingly, as mentioned throughout this video, there were actually two different Double Dragon 3 games. The Rosetta Stone, which we just looked at, and a game known as the Sacred Stones that was released on the NES. This other Double Dragon 3 game was actually developed simultaneously at the same time as the arcade game, so that they could be released within a similar time frame to one another. In many ways, this made sense as the NES platform had become increasingly more important, becoming a huge hit in both the United States and Japan. Traditionally, Technos had released Double Dragon arcade games, then later released highly altered ports suitable for the NES home market, so it made sense really to just make a separate game from scratch. This rise of the home console market, paired with the arcade industry diminishing over time, may explain why Technos got greedy too. It was probably harder to make money in the arcades in 1990. This was 1 year prior to Street Fighter II rejuvenating the market after all. The NES Double Dragon 3 game was developed by Technos, and aesthetically looks a lot closer to its NES predecessors than the arcade game did to what came before it. The game features two key play modes labelled A and B, one which does not allow for friendly fire and one that does, just in case you feel like annoying your brother or sister during a playthrough. Strangely, like the game in the arcades, the game took a lot of steps back from what had been previously established, meaning that this game had more basic controls than what was available in Double Dragon 2 on the platform. But like its arcade counterpart, dashing was added with a double tap of the D-pad, and there has been some extra moves added too. So maybe there was some level of communication between the two development teams at the two companies who made both the Double Dragon 3 games. Like the arcade game, the story in this one takes place after the downfall of the Shadow Warriors, but unlike the arcade game, Marion makes a return, who I guess is alive in the NES canon, but dead in the arcade game's one. She is once again kidnapped by a mysterious organisation. Like in the arcade, the brothers meet the fortune teller Hiruko once more, who informs the brothers that Marion's kidnappers are searching for the 3 Sacred Stones of Power that had been scattered around the world, and that the only way to rescue her is to procure them before the kidnappers do. Once again, this sees the brothers go off fighting round the world, in the same countries visited in the arcade game, but this time on a quest to save Marion, rather than to seek out fights against the world's most powerful fighters. It is also of note that many of the playable characters from the arcade game return too. However, rather than being unlocked through microtransactions or being instantly playable at the start of the game, this time they must be unlocked through other means. Basically, in this game they appear as enemy bosses, however once defeated they become added to a player's party. By pressing the select button at any point, the player can access a character selection screen and switch between any of the available fighters. To add a splash of variety, every character has their own unique fighting techniques and health points and speed, making them suitable for different situations. They each have their own backup weapons too, which can be drawn at any time from the selection screen. When one of your fighters dies within a stage, they are automatically switched out for another fighter. However, the game ends if the whole party has been defeated. Apart from all of these changes, the game looks and feels a lot more like a Double Dragon game than the Double Dragon 3 game that appeared in the arcades, which I guess would not come as a surprise considering this one was produced by Technos themselves. It is basically a challenging beat 'em up game with a sprinkling of platforming elements here and there, allowing players additional opportunities to die if they are unfortunate enough to misstep or mistime a jump. I guess the game is unremarkable at times, but nothing overly offensively bad either. I guess it just did not do enough at the time to stand out. I guess by the time this game was released in 1991, far more impressive beat 'em ups could be played at home, such as Final Fight, Golden Axe and even Streets of Rage. The game was a bit of an instant dinosaur on release when you compare it to games available on other hardware. So whilst the arcade game caused outrage due to its dreadful microtransaction system, the home version of Double Dragon 3 was less remarkable. However, as we all know, it did still cause outrage in its own ways. Well, outrageous amounts of laughter. If people bring up Double Dragon 3 today, most recall the instance where the game hilariously misspells Billy's name as Bimmy. Whilst his name is spelled correctly throughout most of the game, the opening of a 2-player mode playthrough infamously spells his name wrong, which humorously is the most memorable moment of the whole game now. This poor spelling is often put down to the fact that the script in the English version of the game was drastically altered from that of its Japanese counterpart, meaning that localization was probably a tad more challenging than with many other games. For example, in the Japanese version, Marion is never mentioned in the game, and her brothers simply want to become the world's strongest fighters, even leading to a different final boss encounter to reflect these changes. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in the differences between the two versions, including the Japanese version being easier than its Western counterpart. In regards to the infamous Bimmy line though, the Double Dragon series would go on to laugh at this faux pas many years later, when enemy opponents appear in the game Double Dragon Neon, who look like mutated versions of the Lee brothers. These enemies are known as Bimmy and Jammy. They even feature the introductory tagline, the mistranslated mutants. So at least Double Dragon could laugh at itself too. Double Dragon 3 would also go on to appear on lots of other hardware too, but all of the other home ports of the game appear to be ports of the arcade game rather than the NES one. The game would end up appearing across various micro and home computer formats that were popular in Europe, and in terms of systems that sold well on a more global scale, the game would appear on both the Game Boy and Mega Drive. Sprite work in the Game Boy version looks notably similar to what can be found in the NES game, and amusingly the in-game store even makes a return. However, this time items can be purchased using coins dropped by enemy sprites, which is much better. This function is also present in the Mega Drive version of the game too, which I must comment has much smoother animation to what is present in the arcade original. However, this game would not arrive on the hardware until 1993, so despite its improvements, it was not a particularly good looking beat 'em up for the system, as by this point in time you could buy games like Streets of Rage 2 for the platform. So Double Dragon 3 for the Sega hardware is a prime example of a game being dead on arrival. In fact, across the board the home version of Double Dragon 3 was viewed by Technos as a huge commercial failure. Nothing seemed to really go to plan with the project. In fact, when it comes to the NES version of the game, the version they would put the most time, money and effort into creating, the game sold so badly that it would leave their American publishers, Acclaim, left with over 500,000 unsold copies of the title. So in summary, the arcade game will go down in history as the first to try to rip off consumers with microtransactions, and the NES version will be remembered for, well, Bimmy. So at least we got Bimmy from all of this. Every cloud has a silver lining. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Double Dragon 3, the game that caused outrage. Let me know in the comment section what your thoughts on today's video are and what you think of Double Dragon 3 in general. I read all of your comments and absorb all of your wisdom on a daily basis. It is most appreciated. If you want to make sure you do not miss my next Double Dragon video, make sure you like, subscribe and ring that notification bell, as we still have many games in this series to get through yet. In the meantime, I release 2 new videos covering gaming history every week, so I have plenty of content in my backlog for your perusal. Today's video topic was chosen by the people who back this channel over on Patreon, the individuals who help provide funding for the channel for me to work on these videos full time. So without their support, it is doubtful that much of this content would even exist in the first place. So with this in mind, as usual, massive thank yous and shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, A Murder of Crows, Heo, Paulo Lopez, Joseph Razmek, Doug Perkins, Lou Johnson, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinched, Evan Balder, Philip Manth, Cambo Rambo 82, Aswell Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Dropwin Barella, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Carlos Domingos, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Sponge Matt B, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Post TXL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang He, Ron Studd, Isabel End, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Vlaming Renee Sarai, H. Al Sarai, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Yarl, Dan Bandamit, Adam Castin, Gregory Smoragi Wicks, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Mean Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroversa.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai and Andrew Bazanski. I would like to thank all of you so much, along with all of my other patrons, for helping the show to continue to go on. Yeah. Cheerio.